The city exhaled a damp and grey breath, but the chill that racked Elena's body had little to do with the weather. It was a cold that started in the bones, a deep, hollow freeze born of 3 days with nothing but water and a half-eaten apple given in pity. She sat huddled in a recessed doorway, her thin jacket a useless shield against the wind that snaked through the downtown canyons. Every muscle ached, but the most profound pain came from the life stirring within her. Her hand, raw and trembling, rested protectively over the tight swell of her belly. The baby was her secret son, the only source of warmth in a universe of concrete and indifference. She watched the legs of strangers hurry past, expensive shoes, worn-out sneakers, all moving toward a place she no longer had. Hunger was a living thing inside her, a clawed creature tearing at her insides. It wasn't just an emptiness, it was a constant, dizzying noise that drowned out all other thoughts. The smell of roasted nuts from a street cart was a form of torture, a sweet, smoky promise of a life that was not hers. She saw a woman toss a half-eaten sandwich into a trash can and felt a wave of shame so intense it made her nauseous. The thought of reaching in, of sifting through refuse, was a line she hadn't yet crossed, but the line was getting thinner, more fragile with every passing hour. She wasn't just hungry for food. She was starving for a single glance that didn't hold judgment, for one person to see a woman, not a stain on the sidewalk. A man in a sharp suit stopped to take a call just feet from her, his voice a low, confident rumble of stock prices and dinner reservations. He didn't look at her, but she felt his presence like a physical blow. He was a symbol of the world that had discarded her, a world of warm rooms and full plates. She pulled her knees tighter to her chest, trying to make herself smaller, to vanish into the shadows of the alcove. A child, holding his mother's hand, pointed at her, his innocent curiosity a spotlight on her degradation. The mother pulled him away with a sharp tug, and a whispered word Elena didn't have to hear to understand. Don't look. She was a ghost haunting the edges of their perfect day. With trembling fingers, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out her only treasure, a crumpled e-wallet-sized photograph. It was the ultrasound, a grainy black and white image of a life yet to begin. She smoothed it out on her lap, tracing the faint outline of a tiny spine, a perfectly formed head. This was not a problem, this was a person. This was her son. The world could strip her of her home, her job, and her name, but it could not take this. This image was her shield, her gospel, the one truth in a life built on the rubble of lies told to her. She whispered a promise to the photo, a vow that felt heavier than the entire city. I will not fail you. I will find a way. As dusk blared across the sky, painting the glass towers in shades of orange and purple, a deeper despair began to set in. The shelters would be full by now. Another night of trying to find a hidden corner, of sleeping with one eye open, of fearing the dark and the things that moved within it. She felt a profound exhaustion settle over her, a weariness that went beyond her body. It was the exhaustion of a soul that had fought too hard for too long. She leaned her head back against the cold stone, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. She was not crying from self-pity. She was crying because she was terrified that the promise she had just made to her unborn child was one she was no longer strong enough to keep. The sterile whiteness of the room was the first thing she saw, a blinding contrast to the grimy grey of the world she'd left behind. Crisp, clean sheets were tucked around her, and the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of expensive machines. Elena's first coherent thought wasn't relief, but a jolt of pure animal terror. This wasn't a shelter. This was a place of rules, of paperwork, of questions she couldn't answer. Her hand flew to her belly, a frantic, reflexive motion to confirm her son was still there, still safe within her. The luxury surrounding her felt like a trap. It was a world that demanded a price, a world that had procedures for women like her, procedures that often ended with an empty-armed mother and a child swallowed by the system. A nurse entered with a smile that was both kind and clinical, a clipboard held like a verdict in her hands. You gave us quite a scare. Feeling better? We need to get some information for our records. Your name, please. An emergency contact. Every question was a stone, building a wall between Elena and her child. She had no address, no insurance, no one to call who would claim her. The nurse's professional gaze was not unkind, but it was searching, categorizing. Eleanor could see the path laid out before her, the pitying look, the call to social services. the evaluation that would deem her unfit. The panic she'd held at bay for months surged, a tidal wave threatening to drown her. She had to build a lifeboat, right now, out of nothing but words. The lie was born of that panic, a desperate, breathless creation. My name is Elena Beaumont. The name felt strange on her tongue, heavy with an imagined history of wealth and ease. I'm an architect. From Chicago. I was mugged yesterday. They took everything, my purse, my phone, all my identification. She watched the nurse's expression, expecting disbelief, a challenge. Instead, she saw the woman's face soften with a different kind of pity, one reserved for a victim of crime, not a victim of life. The lie, fragile as a spider's web, had held, for a single, precious moment. She wasn't a problem to be managed. She was a person to be helped. She had bought herself time, the most valuable currency in her shattered world. Oh, that's dreadful. You poor thing, the nurse said, her pen poised. Is there any family we can try to reach for you in Chicago? Eleanor's mind raced, weaving a tapestry of fiction. She invented a brother on a business trip, a father who was hard to reach, a life of respectable distance and complicated schedules. She explained that she just needed a day or two to rest, to get her bearings before trying to contact them. Each word was a gamble, another thread in a story that could unravel with a single tug. But a strange strength flowed through her. By shedding the identity of Elena Vargas, the destitute woman, she had put on the armor of Elena Beaumont, the unfortunate traveler, and the world, she was learning, treated its victims very differently based on the clothes they wore. Soon a doctor came, his demeanor shifting from detached professionalism to attentive concern after the nurse quietly briefed him on the architect from Chicago. Yet, Elena felt a new kind of scrutiny. The staff spoke in hushed tones outside her door. Their polite inquiries about her well-being felt like gentle interrogations. Why was a woman like her so far along in her pregnancy, traveling alone? Where was her husband? Their kindness was a thin veneer over a current of suspicion. It wasn't the overt, dismissive judgment of the street, but a more refined, clinical assessment that felt far more threatening. They were judging the cracks in her story, and she knew that one misstep would expose the desperate truth hiding beneath. The strain of the performance was immense. She lived on a knife's edge, terrified of a simple question about a Chicago street she'd never seen, or a building she'd never designed. The nourishing meals and the comfort of the bed were poisoned by the constant, acidic fear of being discovered. Guilt was a heavy shroud she wore day and night. She was a fraud, a thief stealing compassion that belonged to someone else. But then she would feel her son move within her, a gentle, insistent reminder of her purpose. This deception wasn't for her own gain. It was a desperate act of maternal love, a fortress of lies built to shield an innocent life from a world that had already judged him for his mother's poverty. Alone, she watched the city lights ignite the evening sky, a glittering constellation of lives she would never know. From this pristine, elevated room, the streets below looked beautiful, an orderly grid of light and motion. It was a cruel lie. She knew the truth of those streets, the cold, the hunger, the profound loneliness of being invisible. This deception, this borrowed identity, was the only thing standing between her son and that abyss. It was wrong. A voice inside her whispered, it was a sin, but society had sinned against her first, condemning her for being poor and pregnant. She was simply using their own prejudices, their own assumptions about wealth and worth, as her shield and her sword. This was not a lie, it was a battle. The nurse returned with a final update. The gentleman who brought you in, a Mr. Adrian Castellanos, has covered all your expenses. He asked to be informed when you were feeling better. The name hung in the air, a harbinger of a reckoning she knew was coming. This wasn't an anonymous act of charity, it was a debt owed to a specific man, a powerful man, judging by the hospital's deference, a man she had deceived from the moment he helped her. The safety of the room evaporated, replaced by the chilling certainty of a ticking clock. The judgment of the staff was merely a rehearsal. The real verdict, the one that would decide everything, was waiting just outside her door. If this story touched you, like and share. So many people live this reality in silence. Adrian Castellanos moved through his world as if he had designed it himself, a universe of clean lines, predictable data, and silent obedience. His office, Her glass cage, suspended 50 stories above the city, was a testament to his control. He was dissecting a quarterly earnings report with the precision of a surgeon when his assistant interrupted, her voice a soft intrusion. "Sir, an update from the hospital. The woman you brought in yesterday, she's awake." Adrian didn't look up from the screen. The woman was a loose thread, a messy, unplanned variable in an otherwise perfect algorithm. He felt a flicker of annoyance. He had paid the bill. His obligation should have ended there. He saw her not as a person, but as an administrative task he had forgotten to delegate. His head of security delivered the next update with military brevity. Subject is conscious, no identification. Initially claimed amnesia. Now states her name is Elena Beaumont, an architect from Chicago. Says she was mugged. The inconsistencies grated on Adrian's core principles. He despised disorder, and a lie was the ultimate form of chaos. His mind, trained to identify patterns and expose flaws, immediately flagged her story as a fabrication. A flicker of something cold and sharp moved through him. This wasn't about charity anymore. It was about exposing a fraud. He decided to go to the hospital himself, not from a place of compassion, but from a detached, clinical need to personally verify the data and terminate the anomaly. The hospital corridors parted for him. His presence, marked by a tailored suit and an aura of absolute authority, silenced conversations and straightened postures. This sterile environment, a place of hushed emergencies and quiet suffering, held a particular chill for him. It was a monument to his greatest failure, the one variable he could never control. The memory only served to harden the armor around his heart. He stopped outside her room, holding a slim digital tablet that contained the preliminary background check. He wasn't there to offer comfort. He was a creditor, and he had come to collect the truth, an asset he valued far more than money. He was ready to foreclose on her story. He entered the room without knocking, a deliberate act of psychological dominance. Eleanor flinched, pulling the thin hospital blanket closer to her chin. Against the vast white bed, she looked impossibly small, a bird with a broken wing. He saw the pronounced curve of her belly, and for a nanosecond a ghost of a memory, the scent of lavender, a soft laugh, threatened to surface. He crushed it instantly. He stood at the foot of her bed, his shadow falling over her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was devoid of any warmth, a flat, metallic sound. "You are Eleanor Beaumont." It was not a question. It was the opening statement of a cross-examination, and he was both prosecutor and judge. She nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I wanted to thank you for what you did." Her gratitude was a currency he refused to accept. He began to pace slowly, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished floor. His eyes weren't on her, but on the room, cataloguing the details, searching for the cracks. "An architect," he stated, his tone laced with a skepticism as sharp as glass. "From Chicago. It's a city of great design. Tell me, which projects bear the Beaumont signature?" His questions were scalpels, intended to peel back the layers of her deception with methodical precision. He saw her not as a woman in distress, but as an equation he was determined to solve. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She was standing on a stage with no script, the spotlight blinding her. She invented a small firm, a vague specialization in sustainable urban spaces. Anything to fill the predatory silence he left between his questions. She could feel his disbelief, a cold wave rolling off him. Looking at this man, encased in a fortress of wealth and cynicism, she knew that the truth would be a death sentence. Her truth of poverty, abandonment, and desperation was a language he would never understand. A flicker of defiance ignited within her fear. He wasn't offering a hand, he was wielding a hammer, ready to shatter her fragile shield. She would not let him. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a tightening wire between his cold interrogation and her desperate defense. Adrian saw it all, the cheap, worn sneakers tucked under the bed, the way her hands, rough and unmanicured, betrayed a life of labor, not design. The facts didn't align, and the discrepancy fueled his contempt. He felt a grim satisfaction in her struggle. It confirmed his worldview, that people were inherently deceitful, their motives always transactional. He stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "My office will be in touch," he said, the words a veiled threat. We have resources. We will find your family for you. He was closing the net, certain her story would soon unravel completely. He turned and left without another word, the door clicking shut with a sound of finality. Elena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her body trembling with the strain of the performance. For Adrian, walking back through the silent white halls, the encounter should have been a simple victory, a confirmation of his own superior judgment. Yet, an image lingered against his will, the fierce-eyed protective terror in her eyes. It was not the look of a common swindler. It was the look of a cornered animal guarding its young. He dismissed the thought as irrelevant emotional data, but the clean, logical lines of his world had been disrupted. A chaotic human element had been introduced, and it left an unsettling echo in the profound silence of his soul. Do you believe in second chances? Comment below. We want to hear from you. Adrian's first move was not one of charity, but of control. He had Elena discharged from the hospital and taken, not to a shelter, but to a sterile, high-end corporate apartment he owned downtown. The place was a glass box in the sky, furnished with minimalist precision and devoid of any personal touch. It was not a sanctuary, it was an observation chamber. He wanted her surrounded by a luxury she couldn't possibly afford, a silent, constant accusation against her fabricated identity. His security team had already confirmed his suspicions. There was no Elena Beaumont, architect. This apartment was a gilded cage, and he was the scientist, waiting with cold patience for his subject to reveal her true, desperate nature under the pressure of his unearned generosity. Elena stepped into the apartment, and the sheer, cold opulence felt like a physical blow. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the city as a glittering, indifferent jewel, the same city that had been her tormentor just days before. She resisted its sterile embrace. She refused to sit on the white leather sofa or touch the gleaming chrome fixtures. Instead, she found a corner on the floor, pulling her worn jacket around her shoulders, an island of poverty in an ocean of wealth. To accept this comfort would be to accept his power over her, to admit defeat. Her pride, the last unblemished thing she owned, screamed in protest. This wasn't kindness, it was a more sophisticated form of humiliation. Adrian visited the next day, his presence sucking the air from the room. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He walked to the vast marble island in the kitchen and placed a slim file on its surface, the sound echoing in the silence. "My people are exceptionally good at what they do, Ms. Beaumont," he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Yet, they seem to be having trouble locating any record of your family or your architectural firm. It's as if you simply appeared." He watched her, his eyes like chips of ice, waiting for her to crumble. This was a game to him, a slow, methodical dismantling of her fragile reality. He relished the power, the certainty of his judgment, but Elena did not crumble. A fire, born of pure maternal terror, ignited in her chest. She met his gaze, her own eyes holding a fierce, desperate light. "Perhaps your people aren't looking in the right places," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. "My life isn't a public record for you to dissect." She knew it was a losing battle, but she would not surrender. Every second she held his condescending gaze was another second her son was safe from the world he represented. In a gesture of pure defiance, she turned her back on him to look out the window, refusing to let him see the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. The pressure intensified with the arrival of his housekeeper, a stern, impeccably dressed woman named Mrs. Davies. Her official purpose was to attend to Elena's needs, but her true role was that of a warden. Mrs. Davies moved through the apartment with quiet, judgmental efficiency, her gaze lingering on Elena's worn clothes and her refusal to touch the gourmet food prepared for her. She reported everything to Adrian in concise, factual updates. The subject refuses nourishment. She remains in the clothes she arrived in. She spends the majority of her time by the window, speaking to no one. The housekeeper was the system personified, her silent disapproval reinforcing the immense, unbridgeable chasm between their two worlds. Adrian read the daily reports with a growing sense of irritation. He had expected her to be a simple opportunist, to indulge in the food, the comfort, the clothes. Her stubborn refusal to participate in the charade was an illogical variable that complicated his otherwise clean assessment. He told himself his interest was purely clinical, an intellectual curiosity about the psychology of a cornered liar. Yet, against his will, an image kept intruding upon his cold analysis, the image of her hand resting protectively on her belly. It was a gesture he remembered with an agony he thought he had buried long ago. This woman's defiance wasn't just pride. It was something more primal, and it disturbed the carefully ordered silence of his soul. The final report from his security chief arrived on his tablet, complete and irrefutable. Elena Vargas. No fixed address. Fired from a cleaning job 2 months prior. No family contacts on record. The truth was laid bare. A pathetic and sordid little story that confirmed every cynical belief he held about human nature. A cold satisfaction settled over him. The data was conclusive. He instructed his assistant to have security on standby and to draw up a trespassing notice. He would go to the apartment himself, present her with the facts, and watch her pathetic lie dissolve. Then he would have her removed. It was time to restore order, to scrub this chaotic human element from his life. Elena felt the atmosphere shift. The silence in the apartment grew heavier, charged with an unspoken verdict. She knew he had found her out. She could see it in the finality of his last cold glance, feel it in the way Mrs. Davies now avoided her eyes completely. Her desperate gamble had failed. All she had done was trade a public hell for a private one. Soon, she would be cast out, not just homeless, but branded a fraud. She held the ultrasound photo to her chest, its crumpled edges a testament to her futile struggle. She had fought to give her son a chance, and in the end she had only managed to make their situation worse. The weight of her impending failure was a physical ache, a crushing pressure in her chest. In a final act of psychological cruelty, Adrian sent a social worker to the apartment. The woman was professional and polite, her briefcase full of pamphlets and forms. She spoke in soft, measured tones about support networks and evaluating the best environment for the child. It was a carefully calculated move, designed to show Eleanor the cold, bureaucratic fate that awaited her. He was parading the very system she had lied to escape right before her eyes, demonstrating the futility of her resistance. He wasn't just evicting her, he was ensuring she understood that her only future was the one he and the world he commanded would permit for her. They were now locked in a final, silent standoff. He stood on one side of the chasm, armed with the truth, with money, and with the full weight of the system. She stood on the other, with nothing left but a life growing inside her and the fierce, irrational love that fueled her defiance. The tension in the pristine apartment was thick enough to suffocate, a palpable field of force between his rigid certainty and her raw desperation. He was ready to deliver the final, crushing blow. She was bracing for an impact she knew she could not survive. The stage was set for a confrontation that would irrevocably shatter one of them, or perhaps both. He arrived not with anger, but with the cold finality of a glacier. In his hand he held a slim grey file, not a document but a verdict. The air in the opulent apartment crackled with the unspoken sentence he was about to deliver. Elena watched him approach, her body a rigid line of defense against the inevitable. She knew this was the end of her fragile charade. Adrian stopped a few feet from her, his posture radiating an unassailable authority. He didn't see a desperate, pregnant woman. He saw a flaw in the system, a piece of faulty code he was about to delete. His satisfaction was palpable. He was here to restore order to his world, and she was the chaos he would extinguish. His voice, when he spoke, was a blade of ice, methodically carving away the last of her defenses. He didn't shout, he simply read. Elena Vargas, age 24, no fixed address, terminated from a cleaning position at the Sterling building 2 months ago, no family on record. Each fact was a stone, and he built a wall of her own truth around her, trapping her in its shame. He paused, letting the weight of her exposed life crush the air from her lungs. There is no architect named Elena Beaumont. There is no family coming for you. There is only this lie, and it ends now. He looked at her, expecting tears, begging, a pathetic collapse that would validate his contempt. But Elena did not collapse. The terror that had been her constant companion for months receded, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. The worst had happened. There were no more lies to maintain, no more performances to give. She simply stood there, her hand resting over the life inside her, a silent yet instinctive gesture of protection. His words washed over her, and she absorbed them without flinching. She had been judged by strangers on the street, by nurses in the hospital, and now by this powerful, broken man. His cruelty was nothing new. It was just a wealthier, more articulate version of the world's constant dismissal. Her silence was not submission. It was the quiet dignity of someone with nothing left to lose. Her stillness infuriated him. He had come for a confession, for the gratification of her surrender, but she gave him nothing. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he pressed, his voice finally cracking with a sliver of emotion, not empathy, but pure, cold anger. "You consumed resources. You wasted my time. You are a parasite, taking advantage of a system you think you're clever enough to cheat." He gestured around the pristine apartment. "All of this was built on a fraud. You are a fraud." He needed her to break. He needed to see the pathetic grifter he believed her to be, because if she wasn't that, then his entire, carefully constructed worldview, that compassion was a weakness, and people were fundamentally deceitful, might be wrong. Then she looked at him. Her eyes, clear and devoid of artifice, met his. A strength he could not comprehend rose from the depths of her exhaustion. "You're right," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper that cut through his anger. "Everything you said is true. I am a nobody. I lied." He took a breath, and the next words came not from a place of fear, but from a truth so profound it shook the very foundations of the room. "But this child," she said, her hand tightening on her belly, "he is not a lie. He is the only true thing I have." The raw, unvarnished honesty of her statement hung in the air. Oh, stark contrast to the sterile luxury surrounding them. Her gaze never wavered. It was the look of a soldier defending her last inch of ground. "I did what I had to do," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet, fierce power. "I did it to give him a single chance that I never had. A warm room, a safe place to be born. Was that a crime?" She wasn't asking for his forgiveness or his pity. She was laying her soul bare, explaining the desperate calculus of a mother with no options. She took a step back, creating a chasm between his world of facts and her world of instinct. "You can judge me for my lies. You can throw me back on the street, but don't you dare judge him for his mother's desperation." With that, the fight seemed to leave her. She turned away from him, her shoulders slumping not in defeat, but in utter weariness. She walked to the corner where she had kept her meager belongings and bent down to pick up her worn jacket. It was in that simple, heartbreakingly human motion that the crumpled ultrasound photo slipped from her pocket. It fluttered through the air like a falling leaf, landing face up on the cold and unforgiving marble floor. The image was grainy, a ghost of a life yet to begin, but in the silent, tense room, it was the loudest thing she had ever said. It was her entire truth laid bare at his feet. Adrian's eyes were involuntarily drawn to the small square of paper. He saw the faint curved spine, the perfectly formed head, the tiny miraculous shape of a human being. The image was a key, and it instantly unlocked a vault of pain he had sealed shut 5 years ago. He was no longer in a luxury apartment. He was in another sterile room, looking at another black and white photo, his wife's hand in his. Her face glowing with that same fierce, protective love. The scent of lavender, the sound of her laugh as she talked to their unborn child, the memories flooded him. A tidal wave of grief so powerful it buckled his knees. His armor, forged in guilt and polished with cynicism, shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Elena, but he saw his wife. He saw the unconditional love he had failed to protect. He saw the life he had lost. In that devastating moment of connection, Elena Vargas ceased to be a liar, a problem or a variable. She became a mirror reflecting his own deepest wound. The cold logic that had governed his life evaporated, replaced by the raw, agonizing burn of empathy. He finally understood her desperation, not as a calculation, but as the most powerful force in the universe, a mother's love. The silence that descended was no longer a weapon. It was a fragile truce. The grey file containing all her failures lay forgotten on the counter. His power, his money, his certainty, all of it felt hollow and meaningless in the face of the profound, shared humanity that now connected them. He looked at the woman who had deceived him, this nobody who had fought for her child with the only weapon she had, and he didn't feel anger or contempt. He felt a devastating kinship. The judgment had vanished from his eyes, leaving behind the wreckage of a broken man who was for the first time in 5 years, beginning to feel again. The silence in the room was no longer a weapon, but a fragile, sacred space. Adrian stood frozen, the man of data and logic completely dismantled by a grainy black and white image. He saw not a stranger's child, but the ghost of his own. The armor of cynicism he had worn for 5 years had not just cracked, it had disintegrated, leaving him exposed and raw. He finally looked at Eleanor, truly saw her, and recognized the fierce, protective love he had once cherished and failed to shield. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a stranger to him, hoarse, fractured, and stripped of all authority. He took a single, unsteady step forward, his hand slightly raised, not in command, but in a plea. "Don't," he whispered, the word a ragged piece of his own broken soul. "Please, don't go." He turned away from her, unable to bear the intensity of her gaze, and walked to the vast window, staring blindly at the city below. The reflection showed a hollowed-out man. "This isn't charity," he said, his voice steadier now, though still heavy with an unspeakable grief. "And it isn't pity." He paused, gathering the strength to give voice to his pain. 5 years ago, I lost my wife. She was pregnant with our son." The confession hung in the air, a truth more revealing than any security report. He turned back to face Elena. "Stay here, in this apartment. Let me arrange for a doctor. Let me ensure you and your child are safe. Consider it a debt, owed to a memory." Elena was motionless, her mind struggling to process the abrupt and violent shift in her reality. She had been braced for the cold street, for the final, crushing blow of the system. This offer of sanctuary, born from his own tragedy, felt like a trap in a language she didn't understand. She searched his face, her lifetime of mistrust screaming at her to run, but she saw no manipulation in his eyes. Instead, she saw a profound and desolate sorrow, a pain that mirrored her own desperate fear. She understood then that this was not about power. This was about 2 broken people finding a sliver of common ground in their shared devotion to an unborn child. With quiet, unshakable dignity, she gave a single, slow nod. "For my son," she affirmed, not as a recipient of charity, but as an equal partner in this fragile truce. The atmosphere of the apartment transformed overnight. The sterile, cold space began to feel like a haven. Mrs. Davies, under new and explicit instructions from Adrian, softened her demeanor, her silent judgment replaced by quiet, efficient care. There were no grand gestures, only small, meaningful acts of humanity. Adrian arranged for the best prenatal care in the city. He didn't hover, but he would leave books on nutrition on the coffee table or ensure the kitchen was stocked with fresh fruit. In return, Elena began to eat, her body finally accepting the nourishment it so desperately needed. They rarely spoke of what had happened, but a silent understanding grew between them, a delicate bridge built of shared grief and a mutual, unspoken promise to protect the future that was growing within her. One evening, as the city lights began to sparkle below, Adrian came with a purpose. He sat across from her, not as a benefactor, but as a colleague. "You told me you did whatever it took to give your son a chance," he began, his tone respectful. "That kind of strength, that kind of resolve, it's a rare asset." He slid a tablet across the table, displaying a proposal. It was a paid training position in his company's logistics department, with on-site childcare and a flexible schedule designed for a new mother. "This isn't a gift, Eleanor. It's an opportunity. You have to earn the rest." He then placed a single, solid metal key on the table beside the tablet. "This is yours." She looked from the key to his face, and for the first time in years, she saw the undeniable outline of hope. If this moved you, subscribe to the channel and send this video to someone who needs hope. 6 months later, the city was the same, but Eleanor's world was entirely new. She moved through the gleaming corridors of Adrian's company not as an intruder, but as a valued member of the team. Her desk was organized, her mind sharp, her contributions to logistics meetings consistently insightful. She had discovered a talent for finding order in chaos, a skill honed during her desperate months on the street. Her colleagues respected her not for her connection to the CEO, but for her relentless work ethic and quiet competence. Each morning, she would drop her son, Matteo, at the company's bright, cheerful daycare, a place of laughter and safety. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was the architect of her own life, building a future, brick by earned brick. Adrian Castellanos was a man remade, not by forgetting his past, but by learning to live with it. The ghost of his grief no longer haunted his every step. Instead, it had settled into a quiet, bittersweet ache that reminded him he was still capable of feeling. He often found himself taking a detour through the daycare, watching Matteo's small, perfect hands grasp at a toy, his innocent gurgles echoing in the silent chambers of his heart. The child was not a replacement for the son he had lost, but a living, breathing testament to second chances. His employees saw the change in the small things, a softening around his eyes, a patient tone where there once was only sharp impatience. He was still a titan of industry, but he was no longer a king in an empty castle. One evening, Elena found him in his office, long after everyone else had gone home. He wasn't looking at spreadsheets, but at a small, silver-framed photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes. An old, painful silence might have once filled the space between them, but now there was only a gentle understanding. "She's beautiful," Elena said softly, not intruding, but sharing the moment. Adrian looked up, his expression unguarded. "She believed everyone deserved a chance to be seen," he replied, his voice thick with memory. He then looked directly at Eleanor, a profound gratitude in his gaze. "Thank you for letting me see you." In that moment, they were not a boss and an employee, but two survivors who had found an unlikely harbor in each other's story. The transformation was most evident in the eyes of others. Mrs. Davies, the once stern housekeeper, now brought handmade blankets for Matteo. Her former judgment melted away into a grandmotherly affection. The security chief, who had once delivered the damning report on Elena's identity, now greeted her with a respectful nod, holding the door for her and her stroller. The world had not changed its rules. Poverty and judgment still existed just beyond the glass doors, but Elena's position within it had been irrevocably altered. She had not been given a new identity. She had reclaimed her own. Her worth was no longer a matter of public opinion or financial status. It was a fact, proven every day in her work, her resilience, and her unwavering love for her son. Later that week, a storm broke over the city, the rain lashing against the panoramic windows of the office. Elena stood with Matteo in her arms, watching the downpour. It was the same kind of cold, driving rain that had once soaked her to the bone, a symbol of her deepest despair. But now, from the warm, safe vantage of her new life, it looked different. It was just weather. Adrian appeared in the doorway, his presence no longer a threat, but a comfort. He didn't speak, simply stood beside her, the two of them watching the storm together. The reflection in the glass showed them not as a millionaire and a former homeless woman, but as a small, unlikely family, a quiet fortress of two against the tempest outside. He eventually placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a simple gesture of profound partnership. She looked from the raging storm outside to the sleeping child in her arms, then to the man standing beside her, the man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen compassion over condemnation. A deep, quiet joy filled her, a sense of peace so complete it felt like a miracle. The world could still be cruel, the rain could still fall, but she was no longer drowning. She was home. She had been saved not by a lie, but by the one truth she had never abandoned. A mother's love was a force, powerful enough to remake the world.